Prior to Retainer Club and Aladdin, Craig Weiss was the president and CEO of NJOY, which he led to become the world's largest independent electronic cigarette and vaping company. Our first fireside chat is with Craig Weiss. Welcome, Craig. You probably have to grab that microphone. I know you think that it ain't too far. So I want to take you back. It's 2006, the era of flip phones. The iPhone has not come out yet. It's 2007 when the iPhone comes out. You're looking at money for your company, NJOY. Your main product delivers nicotine electronically. And you're trying to convince investors that you're on the leading edge of what is going to be a billion-dollar market. Tell us about these pioneering conversations.
I had a wonderful mentor who took 3 companies from founding to IPO when he was in his 20s and became one of the 10 partners at Benchmark that did Twitter and eBay. And he basically went from being a really good friend to being a mentor. And he's the first person who taught me that fundraising is really storytelling at the end of the day, and the story that you need to tell is a growth story, that investors basically invest in only one thing, and that's growth. And it doesn't always have to be a revenue growth story. It could be a customer acquisition growth story, but you've got to figure out what is your growth story, and you've got to tell it. And for us, we were focused on, okay, there were some really big numbers out there. You had 1.3 billion people on the planet who smoke, spending almost $1 trillion a year on their smoking habit. And smoking's this really interesting thing because it's the most preventable cause of death in the world. In the United States, smoking's killing almost 500,000 Americans. And what was sort of fascinating for me early on was learning, well, nicotine's not carcinogenic. It's an FDA-approved drug. You've got the patches and the gum. What's killing people is the delivery system. It's this toxic delivery system. If we can give the smokers the nicotine that they crave without the toxicity, it's basically the single greatest public health opportunity of the century. The World Health Organization said 1 billion humans were going to die this century from smoking. And it's also probably one of the greatest economic opportunities. And so that was basically at a high level our story. And you don't need a huge percentage of market penetration of basically $1 trillion a year of consumer spending to have a value proposition. And, it was fun to say, look, I don't think anyone really believes that in 20 years from now, people are going to be lighting something on fire and putting it in their mouth. There's this thing called technology that seems to have, replaced lots of other analog technologies, and this is the next wave of that.
So, did you have a lot of buy-in from the investing community based on that? Because remember, smoking. I don't know if everybody remembers, advertising for smoking is banned.
Right.
So how did you get buy-in from the investment community?
So look, I put all of the people that I spoke with into really 2 camps, the ones who got it and the ones who didn't, right? So some people looked at us like we were the devil or that we were in a sin category or that we were trying to sell smoking. And, Winston Churchill had a great quote about confusing the arsonist with the firefighter. We were like, we're selling an alternative to this toxic product that kills people. The tobacco companies, which are lauded because they're publicly traded companies with high dividends and the financial community, really likes them. I'm like, these are the only companies in the world that sell a product that when used as directed, kill half of their customers. And they're perfectly allowed to do this because they pay their taxes and, they've settled their litigations. And I just thought this is kind of nuts. And so even today, you see it in the news, right? Juul's getting vilified every single day. And don't get me wrong, it's not good that kids are using Juul products, but kids do lots of stuff they're not supposed to do. They do drugs which aren't sold commercially anywhere. They're drinking alcohol that they're not supposed to be. They're doing lots of things they're not supposed to do. And so, selling this product that's an alternative to the toxic product, should have been lauded. When I started, so in 2008 and 2009, the smoking rate in this country was going up. It was over 21% of the adults in the United States smoked when I started at NJOY. Today, that number is, I think, dropping below 12%. It's a huge thing. You're talking about, almost 10 million people who are not doing this toxic thing that was killing them and the people standing next to them. So at a high level, that was kind of our story. But some people got it, some people didn't.
Yep. Yep. So let's talk about know thyself and thy business. NJOY is considered, a sin category. So and we've talked about this. What are your 5 bottom line tenets that you walk into every investor PE meeting with?
Yeah, so I got kind of ruthlessly efficient at this because I was so sick of having these conversations where people misunderstood our business. And so I remember we tried to get a $20 million ABL, and I got rejected by the first 25 banks that I talked to. And it got to a point where I realized there were the same kind of 5 issues that were recurring. And so I just started my meeting. I would walk in and for the meeting, and I would just say, okay, look, these are the 5 issues that you might have a problem with. I'm just going to get them off, like sort of on the table right now, and you just tell me if there's an issue with any of them. There's a perceived issue that we're a sin category. We're not, but some people think that we are mistakenly. There's a perceived concentration issue because the way it works is we were distributing our products in 90,000 doors in the United States and another 40,000 in Europe, and there's this company called McLane, which is a $34 billion Berkshire Hathaway company, which is the main distributor for the convenience store industry. So the way that works is, a convenience store like a 7-Eleven, they don't want to deal with 2,000 vendors for their 2,000 SKUs. They deal with McLane. McLane rolls up with these 2,000 products. So all of our revenue looked like it was coming from one customer, which was McLane, but it was not true. They were just a proxy for all of our customers, which were all these retailers. So I said, we got this perceived concentration issue. And I said, we won't do any personal guarantees. That was my mentor. He said, I will never let you sign a personal guarantee under any circumstances. So I remember we had one meeting with a bank, and they're like, oh, well, like that's like an issue. I'm like, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming in. It was a short meeting. And then, we went through, also just the fact that we didn't have, 3 years of audited financials during the early conversations. I just kind of listed all of these things, and it was an efficient conversation to get past all of it. But yeah, I mean, everyone has their thing. I found when I was talking to private equity, as soon as someone asked me about trailing 12-month fill in the blank, I was in the wrong room. Like it didn't matter if it was revenue, EBITDA. I was like, this is a complete waste of my time.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it pretty easy, right? You narrow it down, you get to the right people very quickly. And I think a lot of people you burn a lot of calories talking to the wrong people, to get to that. So it's know thyself. Now tell me, what do you think is more challenging, the first $1 million in revenue or PE funding?
Oh, for sure, the PE funding. It's. I used to joke with my brother, one of my brothers, that I was explaining to him what due diligence was, and I said it's sort of like this. It's sort of like me saying your diploma from your university is not sufficient evidence to me that you went to college. What I need is affidavits from all 32 professors that you took classes with, along with your final paper or final exam, and you're going to be like, I'm not in touch with those. That's not my problem.
Yeah. So PE funding was a little more challenging.
So painful.
So I know you've been involved with a couple companies. Have you ever filed an S1 or IPO statement? And if so, what was the result of that?
Yeah, we filed an S1 under the Jobs Act confidentially with NJOY back in the day, and we ended up not going public at the time.
So when under the Jobs Act, an S1 is confidential.
Yeah, so no one knew other than us. We didn't get, what ends up happening is if you end up IPOing, there's about a 3-week window where it is public, and that's in theory when you could get approached by potential strategic partners or PE firms, correct?
Okay, and then can you share some of the details of your PE deal? How did you come to agreement? First of all, this is a big one. How did you come to agreement on your valuation?
So, the valuation conversation is, for me, I have a different perspective than probably a lot of the other people in the room. Our whole focus was on the future. Anything about the past was sort of irrelevant. And I'll just use as an example. I've been advising JUUL for the last 2 years, and they did. I think they did $17 million in EBITDA last year, and they got valued at $38 billion in December. So,
significant.
Right? So there's a little bit of a disconnect, right, between the way that the math normally works and the way it worked in my world. So I was in that world. I mean, when we raised money at $1 billion valuation from Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, and Bain Capital, I think that previous year we had $80 million in revenue and lost tens of millions of dollars. So, you've got to sort of know what your story is and who you're talking to about. It's all about, in our case, it was all about the sort of the future, the growth, the customer acquisition, and the sort of future market opportunity. But yeah, I think, so with our private equity deals, our first private equity partner was Catterton. They're the largest private equity firm in the United States that just does consumer products, consumer services, based in Greenwich, Connecticut. We had a wonderful relationship with them. I have to say, like all of the stereotypes of bad stereotypes of private equity was not my personal experience. My relationship partner, I'm still in touch with to this day. And it wasn't because everything always went great. We had plenty of problems. Wonderful guy, very, very helpful. That was great. But the way it worked was very simple. I got introduced to him the day before I was about to sign with Piper Jaffray to do a competitive raise. And I said, look, if you want to preempt a competitive raise, you can give us a term sheet, and I'm ready to sign. We're going to go on Monday. And I said, but listen, I'm just going to give you some advice. Like, give us a plain vanilla term sheet. Like, we don't need adult supervision. Here are the people who are on our board. Here's the people who are running the company. Like, and if you can do that, and if it's in the ballpark, you'll save me time and money. And so I'd consider that. So they gave me a super plain vanilla term sheet. The Piper Jaffray had said that we were probably going to be able to raise between $60 and $100 million valuation. Theirs was 80, and I didn't counter.
In the ballpark?
Yeah, I didn't even counter because I was like, all right, they're right in the middle range, and so we went forward with them, and it was a great relationship. The subsequent two series, the next two raises, which were much higher at 425 pre and then $1 billion pre, those were more complicated, and those I would have wanted to get a do-over on some of the terms that we agreed to that I wouldn't have agreed to today. And that was really my fault because I didn't run a competitive process for any of the three raises. And so when you get to the 11th hour and you need the money and you have no leverage to negotiate.
How important is it to have a competitive process?
I think it's critical, and people should learn from my mistake. I think it's so important to have a competitive process because if you don't, you get to a point where you really need the money and you kind of can't walk away. And then, unfortunately, that's not the situation you ever want to be in when you're negotiating.
Yep. Did you get any pushback on compensation for either your executive team or people in your organization?
No, there was no push on any of that. And in fact, more than that, my mentor had said, look, he had $100 million of paper value that by the time he could sell was at 2. And he was like, I'm not going to let that happen to you either. So he insisted that on every round that I take personally chips off the table as the CEO, which I, of course, made sure all of the other people on the senior team were able to do as well. And there was no pushback on that either. I think 10 years ago there would have been, 15 years ago there would have been. But I think today the understanding is you don't really want your CEO like so scared of losing everything that they're going to get too conservative. So if you let them take enough chips off the table to sort of know that they can put food on the table, then they can kind of swing for the fences.
Yep. What was the process made more challenging just because of Arizona?
Certainly we were always dealing with going to New York. So, people definitely looked at us a little bit funny that we were headquartered in Arizona. How are you going to recruit talent? How are you going to get, marketing talent? How are you going to get R&D talent?
We're going to try to solve some of that today.
Yeah. So we had to push through that, and they were shocked to hear that Phoenix was the 5th largest city in the United States, which I had to keep reminding them of. But yeah, we were able to. Part of it was we were successful as a company, so we were able to say, look, it's working.
Yeah. So during this whole process, were you ever offered subordinated debt, which I'm really interested in? We have a PE company here that offers subordinated debt along with equity. Were you ever offered that as a strategy? Yeah,
we looked into mezz at one point, and I had a really good friend who became one of my board members, a really smart guy. He'd raised $100 million from Goldman Sachs as a minority investor in his company. And his sort of speech to me was, don't make the mistake I made. I took mezz, and here's the deal. On paper, it's better than equity on paper. The problem is if you hit a speed bump, you are screwed. Like, they own you. Like, it's a catastrophe. And that happened to me, and it was a disaster to get out from under that deal. And so it's the right deal if you kind of have a crystal ball and you know that everything's going to go smoothly. But if you run into problems, it's not the right deal. So I didn't do it for that reason.
Yeah. Tell us about the PE transaction. Who is on their due diligence team, and did you have any disagreements with that process?
There was certainly a whole team of people in all three cases. And there's always that disconnect where you've got your relationship with the senior guy, but then it's all of the junior people that you're dealing with. For the most part, it was super stressful. I would say there was no really serious disagreements. The one thing that I do remember was I have advice that I give to fellow CEOs who go through diligence, which is, you're going to be in diligence for some period of time, 30, 60, days or so. And I said, during that time, things continue to happen with your company. Maybe some bad things, but hopefully some good things. And so I said, my advice was, if something unexpectedly good happens to your company during diligence, don't tell them. And my theory behind not telling them was, you just don't know if something bad is going to happen, and you might need to offset that with this good piece of news. And so so I'll give you an example with NJOY. With my first diligence, we landed Walmart as a customer during the diligence period, and I did not tell Catterton. And so I was just waiting for something for them to tell me, oh, we've got a problem, we're concerned, this, that. And so in the end, that didn't happen. And so we closed on a Friday, and on Monday I called up and said, great news, we just got Walmart. And then they looked like geniuses, right? They felt great, and for me, it was like a win-win.
Yep.
So
let's talk about rate and timing. You and I talked about this. 440 of the S&P 500, the original S&P 500, are no longer there. At this rate, we're adding a new S&P 500 company about every 7.5 years. At this rate, how does that affect your decision as a growing company, or potentially a growing company, to take PE financing or not take PE financing, given the rate of growth right now we're seeing in the marketplace?
yeah, look, I have a view that we are living in an insane age of technology, and things are moving so rapidly. And so my view is, I think it's arrogant to think that whatever you're doing, no one's going to do a better job of, or no one's going to figure out another way to do it. So, it used to be that the decision to take PE money or not take PE money was sort of grow fast or grow slow where you own 100%, or grow fast where you own less than 100%. I actually think it's a more complicated question now. If you grow slow, you might die, and before you can succeed, you may only have a 1 or 2 or 3 year window to be successful. I can tell you in NJOY's case, what happened to us. We were the dominant player in the industry. We were the number one company. We had a 47% market share, and then this new technology, here was, we were obsoleting the cigarette, which had been around for 100 years with no changes. And we have this new technology, and within 3 years, there was a newer technology where it didn't look anything like a cigarette, and it was these completely different form factors that more or less obsoleted us. So things move very quickly now, and I think you've got to sort of make hay while the sun is shining.
I totally agree. So let's get into some PE myths and truths. So confirm or deny, or why. Myth 1, PE is a win-lose game. Investors always win and entrepreneurs always lose. True or false?
Well, I would say it's false, but it depends on who you're doing your deal with. I do think some people do have a binary win-lose mentality, and other people have a more win-win mentality. I think you got to choose your partners carefully. I can say with Catterton, I wanted to speak with people that they had invested in, other CEOs, and I talked to like 3 and asked them very hard questions about, well, what happened when you missed your numbers, and all of that. I think they had a sterling reputation, and that proved itself out. With other people, I think had I really dug, I would have heard not so good stories, and I should have put myself in a position where I wouldn't have had to take their money. So I think it depends.
Okay. Fair enough. Valuations are the only consideration when shopping for deals.
Yeah, I mean, so that's another one that I would say I learned a valuable lesson. That's a counterintuitive lesson. The last round I did, at the $1 billion level, everyone's clapping me on the back. You've built a unicorn. Congratulations. We were like only the 5th or 6th $1 billion company in Arizona at the time, and it was a huge mistake. We literally raised at too high a valuation, and no one ever told me that could be a problem, but it was a huge problem, and we were blinded by the fact that we had someone who was willing to give us money at that high valuation, so we went that way, and we would have been way better off at a considerably lower valuation with much better terms.
Mm-hmm. I got 2 more questions. PE investors don't add value because they've never been operators. True or false?
I have to say, I'm just going to give you my personal experience.
Please do.
I feel that a lot of PE firms talk about how much value they add beyond their equity, beyond the capital, and in my experience, there was not a lot of value add, personally. I think they talk about all the value add, but if I look back at all 3, of the 3 big raises we did, certainly I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of things that they did for us that we couldn't have done on our own. And I would say I could count on the fingers of multiple hands things that were detrimental to the business. So in my experience, there was not a ton of value add.
Well, you're going to get an opportunity to debate that in the question and answer
Yeah.
too. So, if offered today, would Aladdin or Retainer Club take PE money?
Yeah, I would under kind of what I did with NJOY the first time, if it was the right partner, and if it was plain vanilla. I think I shared with you, I got a term sheet a couple of weeks ago for Aladdin, and I've been struggling raising money for a long time. And it's valuing the company at $15 million, which sounds great for a startup that's a pre-revenue company, and I'm not going to accept that deal because the terms are terrible. And so if it's plain vanilla and if it's the right deal, I think absolutely, because I want to grow fast and you know.
Last question. What book would you recommend to somebody who's looking for PE money or trying to raise money?
For me, and it gets back to that sort of storytelling comment at the beginning, Simon Sinek has a great book, Start With Why, and there's a great TED Talk about it. It's this idea that you have to know who you are and what you stand for. And for those who don't know, familiar with this concept, it's everybody knows what they do. I'll use NJOY as the example. Everybody knows what you do. Oh, we sell electronic cigarettes. Well, how do you do it? Oh, well, we've got this proprietary technology, and we've got this great way to deliver nicotine to match the pharmacokinetic, delivery of nicotine that's in a combustion cigarette. Well, why? Why are you doing it? And then for that, we had 300 competitors at NJOY. None of them raised the money we raised. None of them hit the valuation we did. And the reason was because we had a better answer to that last question of why than anyone else, which was we said our mission is to obsolete cigarettes. We are a technology company. Like, this is a terrible product, cigarettes. It kills people. It's awful. It causes all of this harm and damage. And we're going to obsolete it with our new technology. That was our why. And by the way, it helped me recruit amazing people. I recruited the 17th Surgeon General of the United States to serve on my board of directors with, we're going to save more lives than you were able to save as the Surgeon General. I recruited, a tenured professor of biochemistry at Princeton to leave that and come join us as our chief scientist. So, we were able to do that because we had a very powerful why. So I'm a big fan of that book.
Well, thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Craig Weiss, we're going to have an opportunity to speak with Craig later on in our panel. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Thank you.